Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to impartially examine ancient scripture to decode what is honestly a remarkably universal human struggle. Whether you're deeply religious or just kind of fascinated by the history of human behavior, you've probably noticed this pattern. When people start a spiritual practice, like prayer, they almost always start out incredibly strong, only to eventually just fade out and give up. So we're going to look directly at how the biblical text diagnoses exactly why this happens, and more importantly, how it suggests we can actually overcome it. So let's dive right into this question. It's the absolute elephant in the room when it comes to spiritual disciplines. Why do we stop? Well, I want to start by just normalizing this. Giving up on a practice like prayer isn't some rare, isolated phenomenon. It is overwhelmingly common. People with the absolute best of intentions find themselves hitting a brick wall. And what's really fascinating here is that the biblical texts don't shame this reality at all. Rather, they analyze it deeply. They break down the literal anatomy of our failure to persist. To get our heads around this, we're going to structure our analysis today around 5 key themes: the struggle of persistence, shallow roots and rocky ground, exhaustion and unanswered prayers, distractions and delayed answers, and finally, how to actually keep praying. We'll map these ancient texts directly to our everyday human vulnerabilities. All right, kicking things off with section 1, the struggle of persistence and normalizing the tendency to quit. The texts we're looking at today make one thing absolutely crystal clear. Giving up is viewed as a completely natural human tendency, especially when we don't see immediate results. The Bible openly acknowledges that quitting is incredibly common. In fact, that's exactly why there are so many teachings, parables, and letters dedicated entirely to the anatomy of why we fail to persist. Think about it. If it were easy, the ancient authors wouldn't have spent so much ink trying to help people navigate through it. Moving right along to section 2, shallow roots and rocky ground, or that emotional high that eventually fades. To paint a picture of this, Jesus uses a famous metaphor known as the parable of the sower. In this story, a planted seed represents a spiritual message or practice, and the different types of soil represent a person's internal receptiveness. We're going to focus specifically on what the text calls the seed on rocky ground. This illustrates people who receive the word with immense joy right out of the gate. They are excited, they are super motivated, but they lack a deep underlying foundation. The soil is just too shallow. And this just brilliantly hits the nail on the head regarding the core problem with that shallowness. As we see in this quote from Matthew 13, when trouble or persecution comes, they quickly fall away. The text is pointing out a fundamental flaw in human motivation here. If a spiritual practice like prayer is built merely on a temporary emotional high, it's incredibly fragile. It requires perfect conditions to survive. But the very moment life gets difficult or inconvenient or painful, that practice simply vanishes because there was no rooted commitment holding it in place. Which brings us to section 3, exhaustion and unanswered prayers. This explores the harsh reality of human limitation. Let's talk about the sheer frustration of unmet expectations. The text in James chapter 4 presents this striking contrast, comparing our personal desires against a larger divine will. It notes that often people ask for things and don't receive them because their motives are kind of misaligned. They're focused solely on spending what they get on their own pleasures. The lesson here is deeply psychological. When our prayers are treated like a cosmic vending machine for our personal desires, the inevitable lack of a yes leads to deep frustration, disappointment, and ultimately a decision to just stop trying altogether. But hey, it isn't always about having bad motives, right? Sometimes it's literally just biology. Take this really famous quote from Matthew 26. The text neutrally observes human limitation here, pointing out that even Jesus' closest friends struggled with consistency during a time of immense stress. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. It's a profound acknowledgement that you might genuinely want to pray, your intentions might be completely pure, but tired minds and physical exhaustion simply get in the way. It is incredibly difficult to sustain a spiritual discipline when your physical battery is at 0. Now let's jump into section 4, distractions and delayed answers, and the external competition for our attention. Circling back to that parable of the sower, Luke 8:14 points out that there's some fierce external competition for our attention. The text calls these the cares of this world, and it specifically lists 3 things: life's worries, riches, and pleasures. Think about how true this rings today. These distractions act like weeds. The text says they literally choke a person's spiritual life. When we become too consumed by anxiety, or ironically, when we get a little too comfortable and swept up in wealth and pleasure, prayer is almost always the very first thing to be pushed aside. Then we have the ultimate test: time. Jesus told his followers a parable specifically to show them that they should always pray and not give up. Why emphasize that? Because of the agonizing waiting period. Between the initial prayer on day 1 and the eventual harvest or answer at the proper time, there is a gap. And sometimes it's a massive gap. The text suggests that right in the middle of that delay is exactly where the vast majority of people lose heart and abandon the whole process. And finally, Section 5, How to Keep Praying. Let's look at the New Testament countermeasures. So here's where it gets really practical. The crucial point is how the text pivots from just diagnosing all our frailties to actually offering clear, actionable solutions. The New Testament provides these direct commands as a prescriptive toolkit. Step 1. Pray continually, from 1 Thessalonians. It suggests weaving the practice into the actual fabric of your daily life, so it isn't easily choked by distractions. Step 2. Do not become weary in doing good, from Galatians, which directly counters that physical and spiritual exhaustion we just talked about. And Step 3. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer, from Romans. This is the absolute antidote to that agonizing waiting period. It's a structured call to maintain endurance, specifically when the soil gets rocky. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to remember that the text in Galatians promises a harvest at the proper time if we do not give up. Reflect on the 5 hurdles we just covered: shallow roots, misaligned motives, exhaustion, worldly distractions, and the pain of delay. Which of these affects you the most? And more importantly, what harvest, what profound growth or answer might you completely miss out on if you grow weary and give up? Thanks so much for joining me today. Keep asking questions.
Thanks for watching.
Stay blessed and don't forget to share this video with everyone.